It was a quiet Sunday noon, the kind where the suburbs looked almost two perfect lawns trimmed, wind chimes tinkling lazily, sunlight laying itself across the porch railings as if posing for a catalog. I stepped out of the taxi with one arm balancing the box of prototypes I had spent the entire morning testing at the studio. My shirt still smelled faintly of burnt solder and lavender detergent, a combination that always ended up clinging to me after long design hours. I wasn't dressed for a relaxed family meal. I looked like someone who had squeezed 30 hours of work into a 12-hour weekend. Which was true. The taxi pulled away before I even had the chance to adjust the strap of my bag. I took a deep breath, tightened my grip on the box, and walked up the stone steps to Grandma's front door, the place that had always felt like a small pocket of sanity in a world where everything else demanded more than I could give. The door opened before I could knock twice. Grandma stood there in her soft blue cardigan and pearl earrings, the ones she wore every Sunday out of habit rather than occasion. Her eyes went immediately to the curb behind me, then back to me, knitting into a look of confusion. "Honey," she said, tilting her head, "why did you come by taxi? Where's the Tesla I gave you for your 22nd birthday?" There was no accusation in her voice, just genuine surprise, the kind that made my stomach twist because I knew I owed her an explanation, one I wasn't ready to say aloud. I opened my mouth. "Grandma, let me explain." But the words barely made it past my lips before Dad's voice cut clean through the doorway, smooth and rehearsed, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. "Mom, relax," he said with a laugh that bounced lightly across the foyer. He stepped forward, one hand casually tucking into his pocket, the other waving off the concern. "The car's with Brie now. She needs it more meetings, brand shoots, collaborations. You know how it is these days. Zoe just works in her little studio. She doesn't need a Tesla for that." I froze. It wasn't the first time he'd diminished my work, but hearing it said so confidently, so publicly, hit differently. My fingers tightened around the box in my arms, and for a second I genuinely thought the cardboard might give way. Grandma's brows drew closer, her gaze narrowing not out of anger but calculation, as though she had just heard a sentence spoken in a language she understood far better than the speaker realized. Behind my father, Brie appeared, peeking from the hallway like she was responding to her cue. Her hair was curled, her makeup perfect in that effortless way she always bragged about online. She flashed a smile that did nothing to soften the sting of Dad's words. "It's just logistics, Grandma," she chimed in. "I'm doing a lot of content shoots lately. It makes more sense this way. Efficiency, right?" Her tone was light, almost playful. Mine would have cracked if I had tried to speak. I didn't. The silence stretched just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable, but not long enough for anyone except Grandma to fully sit in it. Her eyes moved slowly, first to me, then to Dad, then to Brie. She didn't say a word. And that silence was louder than anything else in the room. Dad cleared his throat and clapped his hands lightly as if to move things along. "Anyway," he said brightly, "lunch is ready. Mom made roast chicken and that salad you like, Zoe." I wanted to ask which salad he meant, because he always confused the one I liked with the one Brie liked. But I swallowed the thought. My throat already felt tight enough. Grandma stepped aside, resting a warm hand on my arm as I passed, steadying me in a way no one else seemed to notice. Her voice was gentle when she spoke again, but her eyes stayed sharp. "Come in, honey, set your things down. We'll talk later." I followed her into the dining room. The house smelled like rosemary and fresh bread, the way it always did when she cooked. The table was already set, water glasses shining, napkins folded into perfect triangles, dishes arranged with the kind of care Grandma put into everything she touched. But beneath the familiar warmth was a layer of tension thick enough to taste. Dad chatted about holiday plans as if nothing unusual had happened. Mom fussed over the oven temperature. Brie scrolled on her phone, legs crossed, completely at ease with herself. I sat down quietly, placing my box of prototypes beside my chair. Grandma took her place at the head of the table, smoothing her napkin across her lap with slow, deliberate precision. For a long moment she didn't speak, not even when Mom brought out the chicken. She was thinking deeply. I recognized that look. It was the look she wore only when she was about to unravel something everyone else had tried to hide. When she finally lifted her gaze, she looked straight at me again, not with pity or confusion, but with something else. Something alert. Something protective. She said nothing. But her silence was full of questions, the kind she intended to ask later when no one else could interrupt. The meal went on around us, voices rising and falling like nothing was wrong. But Grandma's mind was already moving. And, though no one else noticed it, I felt a shift in the air, an imperceptible drop in temperature, a soft rumble beneath the floorboards, the quiet beginning of something I couldn't yet name. Something that would change everything. Grandma's silence lingered with me long after the plates were cleared and the kitchen filled with the soft clatter of dishes. I sat there, listening to Bree laugh with Mom in the living room about some brand collaboration she had lined up, something involving a beach photo shoot and a new skincare sponsor. Dad was on his phone, scrolling, chiming in with the occasional distracted, "That's great, sweetheart." Meanwhile, the box of prototypes I had brought sat untouched at my feet, a quiet reminder of the work I had done that morning, work no one ever asked about. And that silence, Grandma's silence, pulled me backward, tugging at memories I thought I had already sorted and shelved. Because the truth was, this wasn't new. It didn't start with the Tesla. It didn't even start when Bri launched her social media brand. It started long before, when we were just kids, and the lines of who mattered for what had already been drawn. Growing up, I was always the quiet one. The one who sat cross-legged on the living room floor with a screwdriver in hand, taking apart old radios, broken toys, clocks, anything mechanical I could find. I didn't talk much, but I watched everything. Mom used to joke that I came out of the womb ready to fix things, and she wasn't wrong. If something jammed, squeaked, blinked, or rattled, I was the one they called. There was a kind of pride in that, I guess. But it also made it too easy for everyone to treat me like the house's silent maintenance worker instead of a child. Bree was different. She was born with a spotlight over her head. Big eyes, perfect smile, the kind of charm that made adults lean down and say, "You're going to be something special." She could talk to anyone, anywhere, about anything. Teachers adored her. Family friends insisted she had star quality. She wasn't just the younger sister, she was the designated face of the family, the one everyone saw as a future success story, long before she ever decided what success meant. The favoritism didn't come suddenly, it grew in small, almost invisible shifts. When I got a full scholarship for high school, the reaction was simple, predictable. "Good job, Zoe. You always figure things out. We knew you would." No celebration. No dinner out, no framed certificate. The message was clear. You're capable. You don't need us. When Bree asked to audition for a local theater program that cost more per month than our mortgage, the response was entirely different. Of course, Mom said, she can't miss opportunities. She's the one people see. Bri got dance lessons, acting classes, private coaching, and summer camps on the coast where girls took glossy photos in matching outfits. And when I asked, years later, how we had afforded all of that when things were tight, Mom just shrugged, "You know how it is. We make it work." Making it work always meant one thing, me. By the time I finished college and started my first job, long nights, long commutes, but finally a paycheck stable enough to breathe with, they knew exactly how to knock on my door. "Zoe, the water heater broke. We'll pay you back as soon as we can. Sweetie, your grandma's insurance didn't cover the whole bill. Can you spot us just for a bit? Bri needs help with tuition this semester." Her financial aid didn't come through in time. Each request came dressed in urgency, wrapped in guilt, tied with a bow labeled family responsibilities. And every single time, I said yes. Because what else could I say? I was the one who fixed things. That was my role. And I didn't mind helping, not at first. But somewhere along the way, the line between helping and funding blurred. My savings account grew slower than it should have. My emergency fund drained and filled and drained again. I learned to live with fewer treats, fewer breaks, fewer splurges, because someone always needed something before I could think about myself. There was only one person who noticed. Only one person who ever looked at my face before looking at what she could take. Grandma. She would sit beside me on her porch swing, brown mug of herbal tea in hand, eyes sharp even when her voice was gentle. "You're tired," she'd say. Not asked, said. And I'd shrug because admitting it felt like weakness. "It's fine," I'd mumble. "Just family stuff." That's when she told me the sentence that followed me into adulthood like a quiet guard dog, loyal and patient until the day I needed it. "You are not a bank, Zoe," she said, tapping her finger against her mug. "You are a person." I didn't understand the weight of those words then. Not fully. But I felt them. And later, I learned why she said them with such certainty. Grandma had run a small logistics business for 30 years, nothing glamorous, just trucks and routes and warehouses. But it made her smart, practical, allergic to financial irresponsibility. She believed people should take care of what they earned. She believed ownership meant something. And she despised, truly despised the way my parents conflated love with access. Taking from the one who worked the hardest to fund the dreams of the one who smiled the brightest was, to Grandma, not just unfair, it was immoral. The Tesla was my 22nd birthday present. Back then, I had just begun my first real job, half software engineering, half product design, entirely chaos. My days blurred into commutes between the studio, the small fabrication shop we partnered with, and the cramped offices of clients who wanted prototypes yesterday. I carried power banks, measuring calipers, notebooks, and 2 laptops everywhere I went. Sometimes I felt like a walking toolkit. My sneakers wore down every 3 months from all the moving. I didn't mind the grind, but I was exhausted in a way I didn't have the vocabulary to explain at 22. Grandma noticed long before I did. That afternoon, she had picked me up from my apartment after my shift, insisting she needed help choosing a new lamp. I believed her grandma was the only person who treated me as if my time was valuable, so if she asked for help, I didn't question it. But instead of driving to a home goods store, she took the freeway toward downtown. I glanced at her, confused. She just smiled like she was holding a secret in her pocket. And then we turned into the Tesla dealership. I remember stopping mid-step the moment we walked inside. The place gleamed. White floors, glass walls, polished frames. A sedan in deep midnight silver sat in the center like it had been sculpted for a movie set. "Grandma?" I whispered, unsure whether I was supposed to follow her or keep my hands tightly to my sides so I didn't accidentally touch something worth more than my annual salary. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she placed a gentle hand on my elbow and guided me toward the silver Model 3. "You're driving too much," she said simply. "Too far on too little sleep. And that old car you're borrowing from your father is one spark away from catching fire." I laughed, embarrassed, but she wasn't joking. She reached for the door handle of the car, opened it, and nodded at me. "Sit." I did. The seat molded to my back like it had been waiting for me. Grandma leaned down so she was eye level with me. "This is not a present to spoil you," she said. "This is a tool. A tool for a woman who works harder than anyone in this family seems to realize." Her voice was steady, unshakable. "I don't give toys, I give tools, and tools belong to the person who uses them." I stared at her, stunned. "Grandma, I can't afford." She cut me off with a tiny flick of her hand. "I already spoke to the manager, it's done. The paperwork will be in your name. Registration, insurance, everything." She tapped the dashboard. "This car is for you to get to work safely and efficiently. It is not to be lent out for fun. It is not to be used as a prop in someone's video." Her tone sharpened on that last sentence, not angry, but protective. I knew exactly who she meant. Because just weeks earlier, Bree had asked if she could borrow my father's old car for a quick photo shoot and came back with a scrape so deep it cost more to fix than the car was worth. She laughed it off. Dad laughed with her. Mom blamed the parking lot. Somehow, always, Bree was the Sunday and everything else orbited around what she needed next. Grandma saw all of it. As she helped me out of the car, Dad arrived, summoned by Grandma's earlier message to meet us here. He burst through the doors with his over-eager grin, already holding his phone up to record. "There's my birthday girl," he called out, sweeping an arm around me and pulling me into a half hug. "Look at this beauty, what a moment. Perfect lighting too, Mom, good choice." He handed his phone to Bri, who immediately found her angles. I caught Grandma's expression then. A tiny, silent exhale. She wasn't annoyed at the photos, they were harmless. She was annoyed at the performance. The way Dad always narrated moments instead of living them. The way Bree made everything look like content. The way I stood there, awkward, caught between gratitude and the sudden sense that I was now a background character in my own birthday. Still, I smiled. Because that's what I did. I made everything easier. Mom arrived last, sliding into the group with her signature voice, a tone that sounded gentle but always carried an undercurrent of instruction. "Well," she said, eyeing the Tesla, "it's lovely. But, you know the rule, right? If something is in the family, it stays in the family. We use things together. It keeps things balanced." Grandma's eyes flicked over instantly, and though she didn't speak, her stare alone was enough to make Mom clear her throat. Dad shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them like he suddenly wasn't sure whose opinion mattered most in that moment. I felt a familiar heat rise in my cheeks. "It's okay," I said softly. "I won't mind sharing sometimes." But Grandma stepped in before I could finish. "No," she said. Quiet. Sharp. Final. "This is Zoe's. She works, she drives, she earns. A tool belongs to the person who uses it, and this one is hers." Her gaze cut through every attempt at negotiation. "We are not doing that family property nonsense today." Bree rolled her eyes but smiled sweetly, the kind of smile that always meant trouble later. "Whatever you say, Grandma. I'm just saying, it's good for us to support each other. My platform helps the family image too." And there it was. The unspoken rule that had ruled our home for years. If I built something, earned something, fixed something, it was communal. It belonged to everyone. But if Bree created something, even just a following, it was sacred. Fragile. A treasure we all had to protect and uplift. My tools were shared resources. Her platform was a holy relic. I didn't fully understand it then, not the depth of it, not the danger of it, but looking back now. Sitting in Grandma's dining room after Dad boldly claimed he'd given my Tesla to Bree because it made sense, I realized this pattern had been written long before I ever drove that car for the first time. On my 22nd birthday, Grandma had handed me the key to independence. My parents had quietly handed Bree the expectation that one day she could take it. And Bree had accepted both without hesitation. If the day at the Tesla showroom had planted the seed of expectation, the months that followed watered it until it grew into something I didn't recognize, something tangled, invasive, quietly suffocating. At first, it was small things. Harmless things. The kinds of requests that came wrapped in smiles and urgency and the fragile tone Bree used whenever she wanted something but didn't want to seem demanding. "Zoe, can I borrow the Tesla for a video shoot? Just one afternoon. It's for a brand collab outside the city. I promise I'll bring it back tonight." Of course I said yes, why wouldn't I? It was one afternoon. Except one afternoon turned into a weekend. And then a week. Then another request. "Sis, I'm doing a beach content trip. My manager says the Tesla would make the whole set look more premium. It's just for a day by the coast." I remember hesitating for half a second, something in me tugging at the boundary I never learned to define. But Bree swooped in with her signature pout, a wounded look that made you feel like denying her was equivalent to kicking a kitten. So I handed her the key. Again. Then came the collaborations with local brands, the coffee shop, the jewelry boutique, the eco-friendly clothing line that apparently all needed lifestyle visuals with the Tesla because it adds a layer of aspirational value to the content. Her words, not mine. And suddenly, without officially deciding anything, the car was no longer really mine. It spent more nights in the parking garage of Bree's luxury apartment building than at my own place. Some mornings, when I rushed out the door with my toolkit and laptop bag slung over my shoulder, I'd reach into my pocket for the key fob out of instinct, only to remember it wasn't there. A dull ache always followed that realization, but I swallowed it each time. It's fine, I told myself. I'll make it work. I always make it work. Dad didn't help. If anything, he tightened the pattern. Every time Bree used the Tesla, he praised her hustle, telling her she was building the family brand. And every time he saw me catching an Uber to the studio, he'd wave casually and say, "You know, you could work remote more often. You don't need to be driving around all the time. Let the Tesla be useful where it matters, sweetie." The way he said matters always stung a little more than I expected. Mom chimed in too. "Your sister needs presence out there," she'd say, gesturing vaguely toward the world outside, the place where Bree's image apparently lived and breathed and built value. "Your work is important, honey, but it's mostly behind the scenes. You can manage without the car. Bree can't." And, just like that, a family consensus formed. Bree's brand needed the Tesla. I didn't. They didn't even phrase it like a question anymore. It became the default, the assumed arrangement. But the Tesla wasn't the only thing that started slipping through my fingers. One evening, after a long day at the studio, I opened my email to a notification from my credit card company. Unusual spending activity detected. My heart lurched. I clicked through. 3 charges. All within 24 hours. $312, Ad Boost Creator Package. $480, Campaign Testing Suite. $699, Influencer Media Tools, Premium Tier. I stared, confused, scrolling for an explanation. And then, hours later, a text popped up from Bree. "Hey sis, hope you don't mind I used your card to run some ads. Just testing stuff for a new campaign. Promise I'll pay it back when the brand deal comes through." I remember the exact moment my chest tightened. I had never given her my credit card. But Mom had asked for it weeks prior to help Bri sign up for a workshop she couldn't afford up front. She must have saved the information. Or passed it to Bri. Or both. The logic didn't matter anymore. What mattered was how easily they used something I earned without permission, and how naturally they expected forgiveness afterward. When I confronted Mom gently about it, she waved her hand with that airy nonchalance she reserved for things she didn't consider important. "Sweetheart, it's family. We share. Don't make it a big deal. When Bri's brand grows, it'll help everyone. Invest now, benefit later." Dad nodded behind her like a backup dancer. "Exactly. Think of it as supporting her launch phase." Launch phase. Like she was a startup, and I was the uncredited investor footing the initial burn rate. I wish I could say I pushed back then. That I recognized the pattern for what it was, exploitation dressed as closeness. But I didn't. I told myself the same lie I had told since I was 17 and paid my first unexpected bill for them. "It's family, just let it go. I can compensate. I'm good with money. I'll make it back." But the truth was, I wasn't good with boundaries. I didn't even know I was allowed to have them. So when more charges rolled in smaller ones, then larger ones, I barely blinked. When Bree told me she needed the Tesla for just a quick content shoot this weekend, I simply nodded, hailing another ride, share app without complaint. And when my parents repeated, "Bri needs this more, Zoe. You know how important her image is." I accepted it as if it were a natural law instead of a choice they made every single day. Meanwhile, my workdays stretched longer. My commute became slower. My fatigue grew thicker. And Bree's life got easier, shinier, cushioned by tools she didn't earn but claimed effortlessly, as if their purpose was always to orbit her. If someone had asked me then why I didn't say no, I wouldn't have had an answer. Because it wasn't one decision, it was 1,000 tiny concessions, strung together like beads on a string I didn't even realize I was holding. But Grandma had noticed. She always noticed. And though I didn't see it yet, the day she saw me step out of that taxi had already set something into motion, something seismic, slow, and inevitable. A shift I could feel, but hadn't yet learned to name. The first real crack in the facade didn't come from a fight, or a dramatic confrontation, or even one of Bree's careless demands. It came quietly, an email notification that slid into my inbox on a Thursday evening while I was tightening the last screws on a prototype. The subject line read, "Business credit limit reached. Action required." At first, I assumed it was a mistake. I barely used that card except for materials and the occasional equipment rental. My expenses were predictable, boring, structured. So I opened the email with the relaxed curiosity of someone expecting a glitch. But as the page loaded and the numbers stared back at me, red, bold, urgent, something cold and startling slid down my spine. My business credit balance was nearly maxed out. Worse, none of the charges were familiar. Digital marketing packages, influencer media bundles, event space rentals, boosted content campaigns. Not one of those transactions had my approval on it. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second the world around me, my tools, my sketches, my half-finished devices felt strangely far away, as if I had been dropped into someone else's life without warning. I clicked through page after page of statements, scrolling, my pulse climbing higher with every unfamiliar vendor. I saw charges from platforms Bree used for her brand, names of studios she rented for photo shoots, subscription services tied to creator analytics dashboards. And then, like a knife twist, I saw one charge labeled Harborloft Studio, Premium Suite Booking. That was the same studio I used for product testing and filming demos for my clients. Except this charge wasn't from my usual room. It was double the price. Triple. High enough to make my vision blur for a second. I didn't feel anger at first, just confusion, thick and disorienting. Then suspicion. Then a sinking dread that wrapped itself around my ribs and pulled tight. I grabbed my phone and opened my banking app. The reality hit even harder there. My business account had been linked without my knowledge to a separate digital wallet labeled Family Fund. My own money. My business money. Funneled into a group account. A group account I'd never heard of. And the transaction history. I swallowed hard as the truth assembled itself in front of me. Ads. Bree's production costs. Studio rental for her video shoots. Paid brand consultations. Skincare samples for content review. Lighting equipment. Wardrobe pulls. And a single, enormous payment to a marketing agency contracted to elevate holistic family image through targeted growth strategies. Family image. There it was again, the word that had been twisted so many times it no longer resembled love but obligation. A currency I was expected to supply endlessly without ever being asked if I had anything left to give. I called Mom. The moment she picked up, her tone told me everything. Cheerful. Busy. Completely unconcerned. "Oh, sweetie. Did you see the new video Bree posted today? It's doing great." "Mom," I said quietly, too quietly. "Why is my business account linked to something called Family Fund?" There was a beat of silence, then a dismissive exhale. "Oh, that. Yes, Bree and I set that up a while back. It made things easier for covering her content expenses, so we didn't have to chase you for card numbers every time. You were always so busy, so we just streamlined it." Streamlined it? My voice cracked not with volume but with disbelief. Mom, that account is for my studio. My work. My clients. You used my business credit. To help the family, she cut in. And you know Bry's brand helps all of us. Think of it as cross-investing. You're always saying you want everyone to support one another. Well, this is how we support her. And once her brand fully takes off, we'll transfer everything back, she promised. She promised. That was supposed to reassure me. But the numbers on my screen didn't lie. Nor did the notification that another charge had just come in a 4-figure invoice for creator event venue rental. My rent for my own studio was due in 3 days, and the balance left wouldn't cover it. I hung up without saying goodbye. The moment the call ended, something in my chest cracked, not a dramatic shatter, but a quiet break, like the first split in a dam that had been holding back too much for too long. I sat down in my dimly lit office, the only light coming from the lamp on my desk and the late sun fading outside the window. My prototypes sat unfinished. My tools lay scattered, but all I saw were numbers. Numbers that didn't belong to me anymore, because I had let them leave my hands without noticing. I opened my laptop and pulled up Excel. If I couldn't breathe, I could at least calculate. I went line by line, charge by charge, vendor by vendor, filling cells with dates, amounts, descriptions. My hands trembled, but I kept typing. Row after row, the spreadsheet filled until it stretched longer than any spec sheet I had ever built. And when I finally reached the bottom, hovering over the cell that held the total, I hesitated. Some part of me knew pressing enter would change something, would make it real. I pressed it anyway. The number appeared. A figure so large it made my stomach twist sharply, violently. I leaned back in my chair, gripping the edge of the desk as nausea rolled through me. It wasn't just the debt. It wasn't even the betrayal. It was the realization, the crushing, undeniable truth that I hadn't just lost my Tesla. If I kept quiet like I always had, if I kept fixing things silently like they expected, I could lose the business I had built with my own hands. This was the first real bottom. The place where the familiar comfort of being useful turned into a cage. And sitting there, in that empty studio with the weight of my family's choices pressing on my chest, I finally understood something Grandma had tried to teach me years ago. It wasn't just that I wasn't a bank. It was that if I didn't stop them now, there would be nothing left in me or in my life to rebuild. Grandma's question at the door, "Where's the Tesla I gave you?" didn't leave my head for the rest of lunch. It sat there like a stone in my stomach while I pushed roasted potatoes around my plate and nodded at conversations I wasn't actually hearing. Bree talked about her latest brand deal, something involving a rooftop party and a champagne sponsor. Dad bragged about how entrepreneurial our family looked online now. Mom complained about rising grocery prices, and then somehow managed to steer the topic back to how proud she was of both her girls, even though she hadn't asked me a single thing about my work. Through all of it, I felt Grandma's eyes on me. Not constantly, not in a way that drew attention. Just present. A steady, quiet awareness sitting at the head of the table. When everyone finally stood up to clear the dishes, she touched my wrist lightly. "Come help me with the herbs on the balcony," she said. It wasn't really a request. The balcony had always been her little sanctuary. A narrow strip of space with clay pots lined up along the railing, basil and rosemary and thyme spilling over the edges. You could see the whole neighborhood from there. The matching roofs, the tree-lined streets, the cars parked neatly in driveways. For years, that view had calmed me. Today, it made me feel like I was trapped inside a snow globe I hadn't chosen. Grandma slid the glass door shut behind us, the muffled sounds of my family's chatter fading into a distant hum. The late afternoon sun dipped low, washing everything in warm gold. She picked up a small watering can, poured a trickle over the nearest pot, and said, without looking at me, "You didn't drive the Tesla here, and you didn't forget it exists. So, what's really going on, Zoe?" The automatic answer rose to my lips like a reflex. "I'm fine. It's nothing." Don't worry. The same 3 lies I'd been using for years to smooth over the edges of everything. I'm okay, Grandma, I started, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be. Really, it's just. Something in my chest snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically. More like a thread that had been pulled too tight for too long finally giving way. The word just tangled on my tongue, and suddenly my vision blurred. I hadn't cried in front of anyone in years. I'd learned early that tears made my parents uncomfortable and made Bree roll her eyes, so I trained myself out of it. I swallowed hard, tried again. It's just. But the rest never came. My shoulders shook once, then again, and before I could stop it, I was crying. Not the loud, messy sobbing you see in movies, but the kind of quiet, restrained crying that feels even worse because you're still trying to hold yourself together while everything inside is coming apart. I lifted a hand to my face, embarrassed, but Grandma gently caught my wrist and lowered it. "Let it out," she said softly. "You don't owe anyone composure with me." I told her everything. The words tumbled out in uneven bursts. The taxi, the missing Tesla, Dad's smug explanation at the door, Bry's logistics comment, the business account linked to the so-called family fund, the avalanche of ad charges, the almost overdue studio rent, the spreadsheet, the total that made me physically sick. I heard my own voice shake when I said, "They're using my business card to fund her content, Grandma." And they didn't even ask. They just decided. I expected her to explode, to curse, to call my parents greedy or irresponsible or worse. It would have almost been a relief to have someone match the anger I didn't know where to put. But she didn't do any of that. Instead, she was very, very quiet. She set the watering can down carefully, as if even that small movement needed intention, then turned to face me fully. Her expression was not soft, but it wasn't harsh either. It was serious, focused, like she was staring at a ledger only she could see. "Zoe," she said slowly, "do you want to keep being their bank, or do you want to be the owner of your own work?" Her words landed like a hammer. Simple, heavy, precise. I opened my mouth, instinctively searching for a middle ground that didn't exist. "They're my family," I whispered. "I don't want to abandon them. I just." She raised a hand gently to stop me. That wasn't my question. Her eyes softened, but her voice did not. I asked, "Do you want to continue being their bank, or do you want to be the one in charge of your own life and business?" The truth, when I finally said it, was small and raw. "I want to be in charge," I admitted. "But if I stop helping, they'll say I'm selfish, ungrateful. They'll make me the bad guy." "They already do," Grandma replied, not unkindly. "They've just dressed it up in prettier words." She stepped closer, reaching up to brush a tear I hadn't realized had fallen from my cheek. "Listen to me, child. This is not about blame, it's about math and patterns. You have let them build a system where your work funds their comfort. That system will not stop because you are kind. It will stop because you decide to close the tap." I took a shaky breath. "I don't even know where to start." "Good," she said. "Starting from confusion is better than starting from denial." She patted the balcony chair beside her and sat down, waiting until I joined her. The evening air was cooler now, the sounds of my family faint behind the glass. "First thing, do not delete anything. No emails, no statements, no transaction records. No texts about borrowing cards or investing in the brand. You keep every single piece of proof. You understand?" I nodded, wiping my nose with the back of my hand. "Yes." "Second," she continued, "you organize it. That spreadsheet you mentioned? Good. Expand it, print it, back it up. You are an engineer. Treat this like a system failure analysis, because that's exactly what it is." Her eyes glinted, a hint of pride breaking through the sternness. "You document the failure." For the first time that day, I almost laughed. It came out more like a shaky exhale, but it was something. "That's the most grandma thing you've ever said," I muttered, and she smiled faintly. "Well, I'm not going to start being someone else now, am I? She replied. She leaned back, looking out over the rows of identical houses, her voice turning contemplative. Your parents, they are who they are. They believe in this fantasy of a family brand, and they are using your reliability to pay for it. Your sister. She's been trained to see herself as the investment, and everyone else as the investors. Yelling at them won't fix that. Crying in front of them won't fix that. You know what does? She turned back to me. Consequences and clarity. In that order, Arlie died. I swallowed. So what do you want me to do? Not what I want, she corrected. What you want, but if you are asking for my advice. She paused, choosing each word carefully. Next Sunday, we're having lunch again. All of them. Your parents, your sister. I will invite them under my name and tell them we are discussing holiday plans and some paperwork. You will bring your laptop, your file, your printed statements. You will sit at this same table and we will lay everything out. Numbers. Dates. Transactions. You will not accuse. You will present. You will not cry. You already did that with me. This time, you will show them the cost of their family fund in black and white. My stomach flipped. And the Tesla? Her eyes hardened, just slightly. The Tesla is legally in your name, yes? I nodded. Then we'll let them explain to my face why they think they can give away property that does not belong to them. I am very curious to hear that logic spoken out loud. There was steel in her tone now. Not uncontrolled fury, something colder. Sharper. The kind of resolve that made me suddenly very grateful she was on my side. What if they get angry? I asked quietly. What if they say I'm tearing the family apart? She exhaled slowly, watching a breeze flutter the leaves of her basil plant. Families do not break because one person stops being exploited, she said. They break because too many people are comfortable with the exploitation. If they choose to be angry at you for drawing a line, that is their reflection, not yours. She reached for my hand, squeezed it gently. You are not responsible for how they react to the truth. You are only responsible for whether you continue to fund the lie. A knot in my chest loosened not fully, but enough to breathe a little deeper. So I keep everything. I document. I bring it next Sunday. And in the meantime, she added, you make no more payments for the family. None. When they ask and they will, you can simply say, I'm reviewing my finances. Which is true. You will be. Let them feel the edges of your absence. It will show you very quickly who sees you as a person and who sees you as a service. We sat there in silence for a moment, watching the sky darken from gold to soft blue. Behind the glass door, I could see Bree lifting her phone, framing herself in the kitchen light, laughing at something on the screen. Dad passed behind her, patting her shoulder, proud. Mom moved dishes around, glancing at the camera to make sure nothing looked off. A perfect, curated scene. Grandma? I said quietly. Yes, honey? Thank you for not treating me like I'm crazy. She squeezed my hand again, firmer this time. You're not crazy, she said. You're just waking up. And waking up hurts. But once you're fully awake, you don't go back to sleep in the same house. She stood up slowly, joints protesting a little, and slid the balcony door open. The sounds of my family spilled back in, bright and oblivious. Now wipe your face, she added lightly. No need to give them a preview of next week. I laughed, a real, small laugh this time, and did as she said. When I stepped back into the living room, carrying the weight of my decision quietly under my ribs, no one noticed the difference in me. But Grandma did, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel completely alone. I backed to my studio that evening with the kind of focus that only comes after a breaking point. The city lights slipped past me in long, blurred streaks, but I barely registered them. Grandma's words replayed over and over in my mind, steady, unyielding, like a metronome guiding me toward a rhythm I had never let myself hear before. Do you want to be their bank, or do you want to own your life? The question echoed so loudly that by the time I unlocked the studio door, something inside me had already shifted into place. The studio was dark, except for the faint glow of the street lamp outside the window. My prototypes sat exactly where I'd left them earlier that day, half assembled, wires exposed, tools scattered like the remnants of a battle I'd fought only halfway. But tonight, I didn't reach for any of it. Tonight, I walked straight to my desk, turned on the lamp, and opened my laptop. The spreadsheet was still there. The one that held the full weight of what my family had taken. The one that had made me physically sick just hours before. I stared at it for a long moment, grounding myself in what was real, what was documented, what was undeniable. Then I opened my browser. The first step was passwords. I logged into my email, my bank, my business platforms, any account that had even a sliver of financial access. I changed every password to something long, complicated, and memorable only to me. I added two-factor authentication using my personal phone. Then I opened the banking portal for my business account and found the section that listed all linked digital wallets. There it was, Family Fund Wallet. Linked by authorized user. Brianna H. Authorized user. Miyaf clenched. I clicked unlink. A confirmation message popped up. I pressed yes without hesitation. Next, I scrolled to the recent pays list. My parents' utilities, Bry's content vendor accounts. 2 marketing agencies I had never worked with. I deleted every single one. Then I opened another tab and began the process of creating a brand new business account under my name only, new routing number, new card, new security setup, no shared access. It took time, but it felt like reclaiming a house that had been ransacked room by room. The Tesla app was next. I logged out of the family-shared Apple ID that my parents insisted we all used to keep things convenient. I created a new email just for my car and insurance documents. I changed the registered information, removed all secondary users, updated emergency contacts, everything. When I hit Save Changes, a small message appeared, Primary Control updated. It was the first time I felt a breath of air that didn't crush my lungs. By the time I finished, it was well past midnight. The studio was completely silent except for the soft clicking of my keyboard keys and the hum of my own steadying heartbeat. I sat back in my chair, breathing deeply, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and clarity. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even triumph. It was something quieter, like the first step onto solid ground after years of treading water. Then came the hardest part. Facing them. I opened a blank email addressed to the family group thread: Mom, Dad, Bree. My hands hovered over the keyboard as I tried to choose the right words, not emotional ones, not accusatory ones. Grandma had been very clear, present the facts, not the feelings. So I wrote, Subject: Clarification of financial use and personal assets. I listed everything. A condensed, bullet point summary of the total amount spent from my business account on household costs, Bree's brand, studio rentals, advertising packages, and miscellaneous charges. I attached the spreadsheet. I noted dates, vendors, totals with no commentary. Just data. Then, beneath it, in clear, concise language, I wrote, I will no longer pay or reimburse any household bills. I will no longer provide funding or card access for Bree's brand or marketing. My business account is no longer available for family projects. The Tesla is my legally registered property. It must be returned to me by tomorrow. If not, I will report unauthorized use of business-related assets. I stared at the last line for a long moment. It felt final, scary, even. But it also felt like the truth. And truth, I was learning, is a boundary in itself. I read the email one more time. No pleading, no apology, no justification. Just facts, consequences, and clarity. Then I pressed send. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Mom. Zoe, what is this nonsense? Are you serious? After everything the family has done for you? You sound ungrateful and dramatic. This is not how we raise our daughters. Call me right now. I muted the thread. A moment later, another buzz. Bri, over a car? Seriously? Grow up. You're embarrassing yourself. I muted her too. Then Dad chimed in with his classic conflict avoidance style. Dad, everyone calm down. Let's all take a breath. There's no need for threats. We can talk this out as a family. Zoe, honey, don't do anything rash. Rash. As if protecting my own income and property was irrational. As if what they had done was normal. But I didn't reply. Not to any of them. I turned my phone to Do Not Disturb, placed it face down on the desk, and let the silence settle around me like a blanket. It wasn't peaceful, not yet, but it was mine. A few minutes later, the screen lit up once more, one final notification. Not from the family group. From Grandma. Good. Bring all the documents to my house tomorrow. Just 6 words. But they held more strength than all the noise from my parents and sister combined. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Something in me loosened, and something else, something firmer, took its place. I didn't know what next Sunday would bring. I didn't know how ugly or defensive my family would become when faced with the truth. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking toward a confrontation alone. I had my documentation. I had my clarity. I had my first real no. And I had Grandma. Tomorrow, everything would begin. And this time, the narrative wouldn't be theirs. The next morning arrived faster than I expected. I barely slept, images of spreadsheets, transactions, and my mother's angry messages looping behind my eyelids like a broken reel. But beneath all that noise was something steady, a kind of grounding I hadn't felt in years. Grandma's final text echoed in my mind. Good, bring all the documents to my house tomorrow. There was no question of whether I would go. Only how everything would unfold once I did. I arrived early, carrying my folder of documents, a USB drive, and the printed Excel sheets tucked neatly inside a binder. The air outside was crisp, a thin layer of frost dusting the bushes along Grandma's walkway. Her house looked exactly as it always did, warm, orderly, deceptively peaceful. But today, something about it felt different. As if the walls themselves knew they were about to witness the truth being spoken out loud for the first time in years. Inside, Grandma had already set the dining table, not with food, but with paper. Stacks of it. My printed spreadsheets sat on one side, clipped neatly. And beside them lay a thick binder with colored tabs: blue, green, red, yellow. Legal documents. Contracts. Statements. At the head of the table rested her reading glasses and a small leather notebook she only brought out during serious conversations. Dad arrived next, still trying to look unfazed, but the tightness in his jaw betrayed him. Mom followed close behind, her purse clutched like a weapon, already brimming with indignation. Bree strolled in last, wearing oversized sunglasses despite being indoors, her phone raised as she filmed a quick update for her followers about her busy family day. She didn't notice Grandma silently watching her through narrowed eyes. When everyone finally sat, Grandma folded her hands neatly in front of her and spoke in a tone that carried effortlessly across the room. Thank you all for coming. I told you we'd discuss holiday planning and some paperwork. Mom wasted no time. Mom, she began sharply, turning toward Grandma but pointing subtly at me. Before we get into anything, I need to say this. Zoe has completely overreacted. She's making a mess out of nothing. Bree only borrowed the Tesla a little bit, and everything she spent was for the family's image. She's making us sound. Grandma lifted one hand. Just one. Mom stopped mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open like a puppet whose strings had been abruptly cut. We are not here, Grandma said, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge, to perform the same script we've been performing for years. We are here to look at facts. She reached for the first stack of papers, my Excel printouts, and tapped the top page. These are numbers. Not opinions, not exaggerations, numbers. She slid the first sheet toward the center of the table. Zoe, she said. Read the total. My throat tightened, but I obeyed. I looked down at the figure I had triple-checked at midnight. When I spoke, my voice wavered only slightly. The total used from my business account, personal cards, and savings to cover household expenses, Bry's brand expenses, ads, studio rentals, and related fees. I swallowed hard. It's $42,891. Silence detonated like a bomb. Mom blinked once. Twice. That can't be right, she whispered. Bree, you didn't? But Grandma didn't give her the chance to rewrite the narrative. She picked up the sheet, held it between her fingers, and read the number aloud slowly, clearly as though announcing a verdict. $42,891. Dad shifted uncomfortably. Bree stopped recording. Grandma then set the paper down with deliberate precision. And now, she said, we will call this what it is. She looked from Dad to Mom to Bry. It is theft by usage. Whether or not you intended harm, you used what was not yours. And you allowed Zoe's hard work to fund your comforts without her consent. Mom gasped. Theft? Mom, you're being dramatic. We were supporting our daughter's career. Bry's platform is for the family. Grandma raised her hand again. Stop. Her voice was firm enough to slice through the air. I am done with excuses. Zoe is the only person in this house who earns her own money. And you three have been draining her like she is a bottomless well. She is not your well. And she is not your bank. Dad opened his mouth, perhaps to defend himself, but Grandma held up another document, a will, from the look of it. Before this gets any more emotional, let me explain something I have kept to myself for several years. Mom's eyes narrowed. Dad stiffened. Bry's phone slowly lowered onto the table. Years ago, Grandma said, laying the document flat, I noticed a pattern in this family. Favoritism, financial irresponsibility. A tendency to treat Zoe's achievements as convenient and Bree's image as essential. She sighed, almost sadly. So I created a family trust. Dad blinked. A what? A trust, Grandma repeated, a legally binding structure meant to protect certain assets from misuse. She pulled forward the binder with the colored tabs. Inside this trust, she continued, flipping open to the first section, are three major assets. The Tesla Zoe drives, the small lake house that's been generating rental income for years, and a portion of the stock in our family logistics company. Dad looked as if someone had drained the blood from his face. Mom's eyes widened. But we thought, Mom, you told us. I told you enough, Grandma replied, but not everything. Because if I had, you would have found ways to twist it for your own benefit. Then she dropped the first twist like a stone into still water. The primary beneficiary of that trust, she said, tapping the page, is Zoe. My breath hitched. Dad's chair creaked as he leaned back, stunned. And you, Grandma added, turning to Dad, were never the owner of those assets. You were simply the temporary trustee, someone who manages the trust until the beneficiary is ready. By a manager, she emphasized, not a decision maker, not a distributor, and certainly not someone with the authority to give away property that does not belong to you. Dad's lips parted. I didn't know. You didn't ask, Grandma corrected sharply. Before he could recover, she delivered the second twist, the one that changed everything. When Zoe sent me those spreadsheets, Grandma began, I contacted my attorney, and for the last week, we have been restructuring the trust. I met. Dad swallowed. Mom, what are you saying? I am saying, she replied with chilling calm, that, as of yesterday, you are no longer the trustee. Mom's hand flew to her chest. What? You removed him? Just like that? No, Grandma said. Not just like that. I removed him because he misused his position, failed to protect the assets, and enabled financial exploitation of the trust's rightful beneficiary. She slid a new document toward me. It had my name at the top. Successor Trustee, Zoe Harper. My vision blurred for a moment. Grandma continued, voice unwavering. Effective immediately. 1. Zoe has full control over the Tesla. No one else is authorized to drive or possess it. 2. Zoe now has direct access to all rental income from the lake house. 3. Zoe is exempt from any familial financial obligations unless she chooses otherwise. 4. The amount taken from her business account will be repaid deducted directly from your severance package, David. Bye. Dad's head snapped up. My severance? I am stepping down from the company board next quarter, Grandma said. But before I do, I am restructuring leadership. Your position now includes mandatory restitution to Zoe for the funds misused. That was the attorney's condition for approving the transfer. Mom stared as if the world had tilted. Bri looked physically ill. And then Grandma gave her final blow, not cruel, simply precise. As for Bri, she said, turning her gaze to my sister, you will receive a small startup grant from the trust only if you prove you can support yourself for 12 consecutive months without a single dollar from Zoe. Bri's jaw dropped. 12 what? That's impossible. Grandma tilted her head. Then consider it motivation to learn what responsibility feels like. Silence swallowed the room whole. Then she turned to me, her eyes softening in contrast to the steel she had shown everyone else. Zoe, she said quietly, I did not save you. You saved yourself the moment you said enough. I am simply shifting the light onto the person who deserves it. I felt something warm rise behind my ribs, relief, recognition, maybe something like finally being seen. For the first time in years, my family looked at me not as an ATM, not as the fixer, not as the quiet one who would always bend. They looked at me with shock, with dawning comprehension, with the realization that the balance of power had changed. Not because I fought them, but because I finally stopped letting them fight me. In the days that followed Grandma's family meeting, the atmosphere around my parents' home shifted like a pressure system after a storm. Nothing exploded, no shouting matches, no dramatic walkouts, no police cars or slammed doors. Instead, everything crumbled in that eerily quiet way paper disintegrates when left in water, slowly, softly, but completely. Dad was the first to feel the consequences. 2 days after the meeting, he was called into the office of the family logistics company. Grandma hadn't been dramatic about it, she simply did what she said she would. She presented the board with the trust restructuring, the financial misuse, and the conflict of interest violations. She didn't embellish or shame him, she just delivered facts the same way she had delivered them at the dining table. And facts, when laid bare, have a way of cornering people more effectively than any argument. He didn't lose his job immediately, but he was removed from his managerial role. His bonus was revoked, his influence evaporated. And within a week, his duties were redistributed to people who actually understood logistics instead of family branding. The subtext was clear: he wasn't trustworthy with authority he didn't earn. For the first time in decades, Dad had to look for real work. I heard through Grandma because he certainly wasn't going to tell me that he spent hours scrolling job sites, irritated and frustrated but too proud to admit it. His world had been built on the assumption that everything he had was secure, inherited, or owed. Now, without Grandma's leverage propping him up, he stood on shaking ground for the first time. Mom's reaction was louder, but in a digital way. She took to Facebook like a bird shrieking after its nest had been disturbed. Long, vague posts about betrayal from within, and children losing respect for tradition. Dramatic memes about ungrateful offspring. Photos of Bri with sad captions about supporting my baby during tough times. She never mentioned my name directly, but the implication was clear enough for her online circle: I was the villain. The comments rolled in sympathy from acquaintances, passive-aggressive notes from distant relatives, the usual mixture of validation and gossip that kept people like my mother emotionally fed. She reveled in the attention, her martyrdom neatly packaged behind curated angles and pity-seeking stories. And though a younger version of me might have been devastated, this time it barely grazed me. I knew the truth. And so did Grandma. So did my bank account. So did the legal documents with my name on them. Then there was Bree. Her fall was the quietest but perhaps the most transformative. Without access to my funding streams, the family fund she once treated like a bottomless vending machine evaporated overnight. She tried to keep up appearances, at first posting her usual glam routines, filming videos in her luxury apartment. But maintaining that lifestyle without financial backing proved impossible. Within a month, she broke her lease. She moved into a smaller apartment, one without rooftop access, without marble countertops, without the aesthetic she'd built her brand around. And for the first time, she had to figure out what content looked like when it wasn't sponsored by someone else's money. She messaged me once during that time. A short, clipped text. I didn't realize how much things cost. I didn't reply. Not because I was cruel, but because growth often requires silence from the person you used to lean on. Meanwhile, my life began to expand, not explosively, not overnight, but in a deep, grounded way that felt stable for the first time in years. The rental income from the lake house arrived steadily every month. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to remove the constant tightness in my chest. Enough to give me breathing room. Enough to let me work without fear. With the Tesla back under my control, my daily commutes shortened. My energy returned. I upgraded my studio, not extravagantly, but intentionally. A bigger space with better lighting and stronger floors for heavy equipment. A new 3D printer. Proper storage cabinets. Noise-dampening panels. Tools I had dreamed of for years but always held off buying because I had other obligations. Now those obligations were gone. I hired a part-time assistant, a young engineering student named Lila who asked thoughtful questions and took pride in learning. She reminded me of myself at 20, earnest, curious, hungry to build something meaningful. Training her didn't exhaust me. It felt like passing the torch in a way I had never been allowed to before. Grandma visited often. Sometimes she'd bring pastries. Sometimes she'd bring tea. Sometimes she'd bring nothing at all except her presence. One afternoon, she walked in holding a small newspaper clipping. Without saying a word, she pinned it to my studio fridge. Local female founder revitalizes small hardware design firm. There was a picture of me beside one of my prototypes, smiling, unaware the photo was being taken. The article wasn't long, but it was kind, and it captured something true, that my work had value. That I wasn't just a background character in my family's narrative. Grandma brushed a strand of hair behind my ear and said, "That one deserves to stay up." I realized then something important: the story we had just lived wasn't a revenge tale. It wasn't about humiliating my family or winning against Bree or punishing my parents. It wasn't even about the money, not really. It was about release. About stepping out of the role they had cast me in: quiet fixer, uncomplaining provider, invisible backbone. About choosing myself without apology. Nothing about my rise felt triumphant in the stereotypical sense. I wasn't popping champagne or flaunting my regained independence. I wasn't laughing at my family's distress. In fact, the oddest part was that I felt compassion. Not enough to let them back into my finances. Not enough to erase the past. But enough to see their downfall not as my satisfaction, but as the natural consequence of systems that collapse when they lose the person holding them up. One evening, while locking up the studio, I caught my reflection in the glass door. For the first time, the person staring back didn't look tired, or guilty, or small. She looked steady. Self-owned. Unburdened. Not because she had destroyed anything, but because she had finally stopped letting everything destroy her. And as the late sun dipped behind the buildings, painting the sky in soft gold and blue, I felt something I had been chasing for years. Not justice. Not revenge. Not validation. Freedom. Pure, quiet, earned freedom. A year passed, not suddenly, not dramatically, but with the kind of slow, steady change that reshapes a landscape without anyone noticing until the season has already shifted. If the family meeting had been the earthquake, the months that followed were the aftershock: smaller tremors, subtle cracks, quiet adjustments. And somewhere in the middle of all that, life began to settle into a different rhythm. One that finally, miraculously, felt like mine. My relationship with Mom didn't collapse completely. It changed shape. She still called once a week like she always had, but the topics now hovered gently around weather, neighbors, her garden, the slight ache in her knee, what she saw on the morning news. And I let it be just that. I didn't offer money. She didn't ask for it anymore, not openly, not once the trust documents became common knowledge. She still carried some resentment, that wounded, mother, energy, but she'd softened too. Maybe because she realized pushing harder would only widen the distance. Maybe because she knew now that my silence was no longer the silence of surrender. Dad surprised me more. Every so often, he would stop by my studio on his way home from work, real work, at a new company where no one cared about family image or legacy. The first few visits were painfully awkward. He kept his hands in his pockets. He complimented things that didn't need complimenting. He cleared his throat too often. But he always bought something small: tools, desk organizers, even a prototype lamp I hadn't intended to sell, and he always paid full price. No discounts, no assumptions. Once, when I tried to give him a 10% break, he shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "That's not how we're doing things anymore." It wasn't an apology, but it was real. And sometimes, real is enough to begin again. Bree took the longest to adjust. Losing her lifestyle hit her hard, and for a while she disappeared almost entirely from social media. I didn't check in. I didn't offer help. Growth is uncomfortable, and hers was years overdue. But slowly, almost reluctantly, she found her footing. She started doing smaller projects. Genuine ones. Collaborating with local businesses, shooting videos from her apartment using natural light instead of rented studio sets. She created content that felt less like a performance and more like effort. And sometimes, on quiet afternoons, she would stop by my studio to buy a product as a birthday gift for a friend or a thank you present for a client. She always paid the exact listed price. Once, she even asked me, shy in a way I had never seen, "Do you think I could make something like this someday?" It wasn't a request for money or tools. Just curiosity. Possibility. For the first time, I saw the version of her that might have existed if she'd ever been taught self-reliance instead of entitlement. And as all of them shifted, I shifted too. I learned the simplest truth of all. Saying no will always look like betrayal to the people who benefit from your yes. But no gave me things I never realized I'd lost. Sleep. Peace. Time. Room to breathe, to create, to exist without constantly calculating how to compensate for someone else's choices. Saying no didn't destroy my family. It destroyed the illusion that I owed them every piece of myself. Grandma visited more often than anyone else. She would walk into the studio with a bag of pastries or a stack of magazines under her arm. Sometimes she brought nothing, just herself and her sharp eyes and her quiet pride. She wasn't the type to hover or smother. Instead, she observed. She celebrated small wins. She pinned little successes to my fridge like badges of honor. One day, she placed a new clipping next to the first newspaper article she'd posted months earlier. Local founder expands workshop, hires 2 more women in tech. She tapped the headline with her finger. "Keep this one, it's my favorite so far." People often imagine elders as rescuers or magicians, kind figures who swoop in with money or wisdom or forgiveness. But Grandma wasn't that. She wasn't a fairy godmother. She didn't fix my life. She didn't make my boundaries for me or shout at my parents on my behalf. She simply recognized the moment I finally stood up for myself and used her power to reinforce the line I drew, not erase it. Because real love doesn't overstep your boundaries. It stands with you while you build them. There's an image of her I'll never forget, the one that still sits in my mind whenever I lock the studio door at night. It was late November, the first hint of winter hanging in the air. I had just finished packing up for the day when she stepped into the workshop, her cheeks pink from the cold. I tossed her the Tesla keys, and she laughed. "Driving again, are you?" I teased. "You bet your life," she answered, sliding into the passenger seat as if she'd done it 1,000 times. We drove home together, the sky melting into purples and golds as the first flakes of snow drifted lazily through the air. Halfway down Maple Street, she rested her hand over mine and said, almost like a secret, "Love is not letting people spend what you never offered them." The words settled deep inside me, like a truth I'd been circling for years but only now had the language for. Later, as I dropped her off at her front porch, she turned back, looked directly at me, and smiled the kind of smile that carries decades of knowing behind it. "You've built something good, Zoe. Not just a business, a life. Don't hand it away again." When I got back to the studio, I hung my keys on the little hook I'd screwed into the wall. A simple wooden tag dangled from the ring, burned with the words, "Work, not worship." I turned off the lights one by one, watching the warm glow shrink gently until only a soft strip of gold spilled through the doorframe. For the first time in my life, closing the studio didn't feel like shutting something down. It felt like stepping into something I had created entirely on my own terms. And as I pulled the door closed, my hand lingering on the cool metal for a breath longer than usual, I realized the story wasn't about breaking free from my family. It was about finally returning to myself.